The first Fox News polling since President Biden's withdrawal from the campaign indicates Vice President Harris is virtually tied with or leading former President Trump in a handful of key battleground states.
Well, the Fox propaganda network has yet again publicly triggered Donald Trump by simply reporting facts that Trump finds uncomfortable about Vice President Kamala Harris and her chances of defeating him. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we have several clips to talk about in this video. It seems that the Fox propaganda network has probably reluctantly picked up a new recurring habit of triggering Donald Trump when they occasionally report facts that he finds uncomfortable, such as this one here about a new poll from Fox News themselves. We're going to play the clip and unpack it together.
Breaking tonight, the Harris honeymoon. The first Fox News polling since President Biden's withdrawal from the campaign indicates Vice President Harris is virtually tied with or leading former President Trump in a handful of key battleground states. Michigan registered voters put her and the former president at 49% each. That's 3 percentage points better than President Biden was performing. In Minnesota, the presumptive Democratic nominee is up and has a 6-point advantage there. They are both tied at 49 in Pennsylvania. And former President Trump has a 1-point lead in Wisconsin. Those results are comparable with the Trump versus Biden numbers. Many of the new polls coming out nationally and in the swing states have been within the margin of error in this new race.
Within the margin of error. So again, it's a virtual tie. It's still going to be a very competitive election. Donald Trump may yet still win. All of that's possible. But the fact that Fox, which, by the way, for all their issues, as I've said in various videos in the past, they are a reputable pollster. They are one of the best pollsters in the business. The fact that the polls say what the polls say and that Fox is publicly acknowledging what their own polls say has really pissed off Donald Trump. During a Truth Social rant, he said, "Why doesn't Fox News and Martha McCallum use these poll numbers from Rasmussen, a real pollster, which has Donald Trump 7 points ahead of Vice President Harris?" So he's so upset that they are using poll numbers that he finds uncomfortable, again, which doesn't show a blowout, right? It's not like they're showing the vice president leading Donald Trump by a statistically significant margin. It shows that he can still win the race. They even acknowledge it. They go out of their way, but it's insufficient to him because it just bursts the carefully constructed aura that he exudes apparently to his MAGA cult, which I'm not in it. I doubt you are either. So we don't look at it this way, but they view him as infallible, as this, unprecedentedly popular figure in American politics whose victory is assured. It's divine, it's preordained by the gods. And the polling data conflicts with that. So he's not happy about it. I do want to play some other clips from the Fox propaganda network diving into some of these polls, starting with this one here.
Reuters had a poll out earlier this week as well, Reuters Ipsos, that had her up 2%, also within the margin of error. But to Molly's point, for certainly a change and a change in momentum, and she wasn't coming from. She was coming from a rough spot in terms of where the previous campaign was. So it's turned everything around, but it's still going to be a tight race, and the polling is showing that.
How dare you acknowledge the new polls, sir, publicly on Fox News, when the whole point is just to regurgitate everything which favors Donald Trump. The whole point is to be absolutely devoutly loyal to Trump, even when the facts conflict with him. My God, as I take great joy in reminding people, the Fox propaganda network recently had to fork over $787 million to Dominion Voting Systems, and what is the largest defamation settlement in the United States on record, because they bent over backwards to signal boost lies and conspiracy theories, things they knew to be false because they were terrified of Donald Trump's wrath and the loss of viewer share to more devoutly Trump loyal networks like Newsmax, right? So it's so funny to me. And that's why that's why so many of my videos, when they make the point against Trump, I love using Republicans and Fox News and Newsmax to do it, because it's always more impactful when you're being criticized, occasionally devastated by people who are supposed to be part of your coalition, which is unfortunately all too rare with the Republican Party, given that it's a cult of personality. Another clip here I want to play from that same panel, Kevin Walling, a Democratic strategist who worked for President Biden. He's pretty happy with the polling results and the momentum, and he's going to make a pretty good case here.
Well, certainly this was a critical moment. 50 million views already on Twitter from that video. It's funny that the Trump campaign highlighted the fact that Barack Hussein Obama had not yet endorsed the vice president in their kind of pullback from actually debating the vice president from a prearranged, pre-agreed to debate. So obviously a big day for the vice president with that endorsement. Another big day, obviously, with those polls, Brett, to your point. I looked at two things. Key thing that you highlighted early on is now that the vice president leads in terms of enthusiasm on the ground in Pennsylvania. That is the must-win state for this race. But then also, too, we've talked about double haters, this notion of double haters. The vice president now leads Trump by 41 points with those kind of double haters, up from 27 points when it was Joe Biden just a month ago. So those folks that have tuned out said we don't like either of these folks, seeing that kind of movement is going to be critical and make up the margin in some of these key battlegrounds for sure.
And again, that is very important. I should emphasize, that Brett Baer referenced in the beginning of his clip that he calls it the Harris Honeymoon. And I think as a cynic, right, somebody who sees the glass as half empty, as somebody who thinks that or tends to see like the negative side of things, I do think that we should be cautious, right? It's great to see this enthusiasm, this hype, because we really haven't felt it in the Democratic Party with respect to elections in some time. But it is important to remember that it could potentially be fleeting, right? And the election is still 3 months away, and it's incredibly competitive within the margin of error. But I also want to feed the hype a bit because there's a lot of hype to talk about. So some really crucial statistics since Vice President Harris became the presumptive Democratic nominee. 2,300 events in battleground states, okay, in terms of their weekend. 250 coordinated battleground offices, and 170,000 new volunteers joined the campaign. Okay, this is a staggering series of statistics. The Harris campaign also released this earlier today, $200 million raised since the vice president became the presumptive Democratic nominee. All right. So in a week, $200 million raised. It's an enormous fundraising swell. 66% of that donation came from first-time donors. 66% of that $200 million came from first-time donors. And of course, again, over 170,000 new volunteers. Another stat worth noting, this is more against Trump than anything else, is that the betting markets seem to show that he is basically back to where he was in terms of likelihood to win, probability to win the election. He's still overall the favorite, right? If you look at aggregate polling, but it's down from where it was, or rather, it's back to where it was prior to the assassination attempt against Trump. As somebody pointed out on Twitter and put it like this, Trump has now given up all of his July 13 shooting gains. Folks, that's devastating. That really is. I mean, from the Trump perspective, right? And actually, if you go on Twitter, it's funny because a lot of right-wing commentators, including Molly Hemingway, the right-wing Trump supporter in those clips, we didn't hear from her. She's crazy. You should check her out on social media. Very unhinged stuff. She is furious, as are so many conservatives like Charlie Kirk and others, that more media attention isn't being paid to the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. It seems to have been buried in an avalanche of news stories. And it's been a crazy news cycle for the past 30 to 60 days. I mean, my God, you had the terrible debate. You had the assassination attempt. You had President Biden withdrawing from the race. You had the vice president becoming the presumptive nominee. And all of the, constituent parts of that, the fundraising numbers, the volunteer numbers, the memes that have come out of this. It's been a wild election cycle and a wild news cycle. And a lot of people are upset that the media is not paying more attention to the assassination attempt. But the outcome of that, as we've discussed in previous videos, when we were talking about the immediate aftermath, what it would look like for Donald Trump. We haven't been in this situation in 40 years. It was President Reagan who suffered the last high-profile public assassination attempt as far as presidents or former presidents were concerned. And he was freshly inaugurated. He'd already won his election. It happened months after he became the president of the United States in his first term. And he saw a considerable spike in approval rating, but it lasted only for a few months. And it was, then it receded basically to lower than what it was before he was shot. And that was 40 years ago. And we didn't have social media, and we were not nearly as polarized as we are today. I mean, and Reagan was a more civil, more polite, more affable person who had more appeal to independents and Democrats as well. The thing about Donald Trump, as I said in the aftermath of his shooting, and I expected that this would probably be the case, people have made their minds up about this guy. He's been in our face, social media. He's everywhere. He is ubiquitous, and he is enormously disliked. Even at the high of his post-assassination sympathy swell, he only cracked 40%, which is a statistic I love to bring up because it undermines this idea, this myth that Donald Trump is a beloved or popular figure. He certainly has his cult, and the tens of millions of Americans who love Donald Trump love him deeply. But he has never been somebody who has enjoyed the support of a majority of Americans. It's never happened. He never cracked 50% when he was president. He can barely crack 40%, despite all of the political advantages and despite being shot at. And now he's lost whatever marginal gains those were, and he's back to where he was pre-shooting. Now, again, I've also said, which is what's going to make this election tight, is that President has also never been an overwhelmingly popular figure. I mean, President Biden, when he became president, he enjoyed several months of 50 to 55. It was in the upper 50s, near 60% approval rating, right? So a majority of the country approved of President Biden when he first came into office. And then it was about the time of the Afghanistan withdrawal that the president's approval rating fell, and he never got out of it. It's always been underwater. The vice president was never as popular as President Biden, and she's been relatively unpopular as well. But this is the big difference. As I've said before, and it's so important that people understand this, the data are clear on this. There is potential for the vice president to become more popular, right? She has the youth, she has the energy, she is winning the meme war because she has turned Gen Z around, at least for the moment. She has the fundraising at her back. And to whatever extent people dislike her, they just don't dislike her nearly as much and nearly as permanently as they dislike Donald Trump. Donald Trump is politically tapped out. He has achieved his potential, which was part of the reason why when the race was between President Biden and Donald Trump, the polling was so relatively static, is because people had their minds made up mostly about Trump. And Biden, yes, had room to grow, but it wasn't working, right? There were people who supported President Biden in 2020 who had moved away from him, but didn't move back to Trump. And Biden just wasn't winning those people over. Donald Trump was capped out. The vice president, however, as you see in those polls, her approval rating is going up, and it has room to go up. Donald Trump has achieved his potential. If the vice president achieves hers, she wins. And that is what is freaking out Donald Trump and MAGA so much. And it's why Donald Trump is so upset that Fox News viewers are seeing these polls from Fox News. That's why he says, no, don't talk about those polls. Show Rasmussen instead. Show anything which shows me having a decisive lead over Kamala Harris. It's so pathetic. And again, the most pathetic thing of all, no one's saying that this is set in stone. I'm not saying I am more confident in our ability to win in November, but it's not set in stone. We have to work our asses off to do it. When we have to turn out and turn up and vote, because Donald Trump very well could win this thing. But the possibility of him losing and anyone articulating the possibility that he will lose is just too much for this thin-skinned, malignant narcissist to bear. And that's why he is so triggered by Fox now. Let me know what you think in the comments.